this is something that surprises me the most because I would say the US was the greatest winner from this entire setup, in which the US was the reserve currency of the world. Hence, you
Right.
could basically print your way into like wherever you wanted to go, right? Because there would
Exactly.
always be a market for your US dollars. And Donald Trump, on the one hand, says he would punish anyone working with BRICS on undermining the US dollar. On the other hand, he now tries to weaken the US dollar in order to strengthen the local production, as he says.
Sure.
Does this make sense to you? Like, do you see a strategy in that, and what do you think is the ripple effect of all of both of these strategies at the same time?
Now, here's the interesting thing. I believe that the order of operations are wrong, right? As you say, Trump wants a weaker dollar in order to boost US exports. And on the surface, that does make sense, right? You weaken your dollar, everything else, countries can then buy your exports for a cheaper price. However, he does not realize that US supply chains are not fleshed out yet. It's not like the US has 1,000 mines, 100 mines of rare earths or the refineries there in order to get cheap inputs. They're still importing it from the rest of the world. And so are they with the majority of their steel, copper, aluminum. A lot of it is coming from China and the majority is coming from Canada as well. So what happens when you try to impose a 10 to 25% tariff? Suddenly all your input costs goes up. And because of that, a lot of companies now, they're actually having a difficult conversation with themselves. All right, sure. Trump wants me to shift my industries to the United States. Makes sense. I go there. I do not need to pay a tariff. And because of that, my costs, I'll be able to make a greater amount of profit. But if I do that, if I actually go into the market, I will not be able to export to the rest of the world. My market will be isolated to the US and only the US. So it just becomes a math calculation. If I spend $5, $6 billion to build a factory, how will I be able to make an ROI, return on investment? And if we look at the state of the US consumer now, it is not looking good. Consumer sentiment is plunging. A lot of people, they're going to face $4,000 to $6,000 more in costs every single year. And this is where I think the administration really didn't think things through. Now, Trump's rhetoric is always about, yeah, so they will buy more American products, right? They won't buy the foreign brands. They will buy American products. And on the surface, once again, it makes sense, right? You tariff China at 200%, right? So maybe the goods coming in from China used to be $10, is now $30. Why not just buy an American good at $20 or 25, right? It's still cheaper than China. But he forgot that Americans, like any consumer in the world, they have a third choice. They simply won't buy. They have no money. They won't buy.
We also see from, and you just actually had that video on your channel with Mr. Bassett telling the world that the United States knows exactly what the world needs, and what the world needs is less overcapacity from China. It's that
Yeah,
this complaint, and the funny thing is, this complaint goes back to the Biden administration, right? Biden
right.
came up with the idea to call Chinese exports not exports but overcapacity, as if though China was only allowed to actually produce whatever it can itself consume, right?
Right.
But here, the US runs into the structural problem that these exports to other countries that are not the United States, to third states, are not under its purview, and we see that Trump is trying to create devices like secondary sanctioning, secondary tariff threats of guiding this. What do you make out of this approach?
Well, I would say that this is even more dangerous than what the US did by confiscating Russian assets. This is even worse than trying to weaponize the dollar system. Because right now, the entire world is dependent on a kind of globalized trade. Right now, the current model, a lot of it is to buy cheap products from China, cheap inputs from Vietnam, repackage it, use it as your own inputs, and then, uh, you know, export it out to the Western countries, whether it is Europe or whether it's the US. You get the money that you reinvest, and the whole cycle goes on. But what Trump is doing, these secondary tariffs, is basically telling the world to break apart their business model, to just shatter it completely. Like if we look at how the tariffs on Vietnam is really tragic. Now, we all know Vietnam, the manufacturers they're still climbing the value chain. A lot of their products are apparels, t-shirts, shoes, maybe TVs to a certain extent. Well, the profit margins there are like 10, 20% maximum, and I'm being very generous here. So what happens when you throw up a 49% tariff? You just break the entire business model. And because of that, Americans now need to pay a higher uh, cost of price in order to buy stuff. So consumption in the US is going to drop down. So eventually, if Trump does not U-turn on the tariffs, he'll break a lot of economies out there, but eventually they will recover and they'll move more towards other economies and sell to places like Africa, China, trade amongst themselves in Southeast Asia, and even the Europeans, because the Europeans, they are willing to, break apart all their fiscal limits. So they will be spending more. So in a really twisted sense, the US is isolating themselves against the world. It's the US economy versus the global economy.
Just by the sheer size of the global economy, this is something that I do think is a lost cause.